Christopher Frank Carandini Lee was born on May 27, 1922, in Belgravia, London, the son of a British Army colonel and an Italian contessa whose beauty had once turned heads in Edwardian society. Young Christopher grew up speaking Italian and French before English, fencing at school, and already stood 6'5" by 17. When war broke out in 1939, he was in his final year at Wellington College. He volunteered immediately. The RAF turned him down for pilot training because of a detached retina. Instead, in 1941, he was commissioned into the Royal Air Force Volunteer Reserve as an intelligence officer and sent to southern Rhodesia for training. From 1943 onward, he served in North Africa with the Long-Range Desert Group and Special Forces, then transferred to the SOE, Special Operations Executive, the outfit Churchill called the Ministry of Ungentlemanly Warfare. Officially, he was attached to various units. Unofficially, he parachuted into occupied Greece and Yugoslavia, trained partisans in sabotage, and conducted raids so secret the files are still sealed. He spoke 7 languages fluently and used every one to interrogate prisoners, forge documents, and disappear into crowds wearing peasant clothes while carrying a Fairburn Sykes dagger. In 1944, he was part of the team that hunted down the Butcher of Lyon, Klaus Barbie, and other high-ranking war criminals after VE Day. He never spoke details, only once saying to Peter Jackson decades later, quote, "I know what real evil looks like. I was there when we found the camps." When asked what he did in the war, he would smile and reply, "I was a very dull civil servant." The few comrades who survived called him the tallest, scariest bastard in SOE. He left the RAF in 1946. As a flight lieutenant with the 1939 to 1945 Star, Africa Star, Italy Star, Defense Medal, and War Medal, plus mentions in dispatches he never collected. He drifted into acting because a cousin introduced him to Rank Studios, and they needed someone tall who could fence and speak German. He played monsters, wizards, and villains for 70 years. Dracula, Fu Manchu, Scaramanga, Saruman, Count Dooku, because, as he said, I had already met the real ones. He stood ramrod straight until the day he died, kept a commando dagger on his desk, and never watched horror films about Nazis because they get it wrong. He was knighted in 2009 for services to drama and charity, but the medal he prized most was the tiny enameled badge of the Special Operations Executive that only a handful of people ever recognized. He died on June 7, 2015, at age 93, refusing to be placed on public display because I've seen enough corpses. The Ministry of Defense lowered flags to half-mast at Hereford, home of the modern SAS, a gesture almost never granted to actors. Christopher Lee was the tallest vampire in cinema, but in real life, he had hunted far darker creatures across half of Europe, and the only blood he ever spilled was in places the history books still refuse to name. Alec Guinness de Cuffy was born on April 2, 1914 in Marylebone, London, illegitimate son of a banker who never acknowledged him. He grew up in boarding houses, changing his surname to Guinness at 18 because it sounded less like a confession. By 1939, he was already a star of the Old Vic, playing Hamlet and Richard II while bombs fell on London. He joined the Royal Navy Volunteer Reserve in 1941 at age 27, commissioned as a temporary sub-lieutenant because someone had to do it and I rather fancied the uniform. After officer training, he was sent to the United States to learn how to handle landing craft at Little Creek, Virginia. In 1943, he took command of Landing Craft Infantry Large 124, a flat-bottomed,
noisy box of steel designed to carry 200 troops and run itself onto beaches. He sailed it across the Atlantic in convoy, surviving a North Atlantic gale that nearly capsized the boat, and arrived off Sicily for Operation Husky on July 10, 1943. His first landing was at Cape Passero, southern Sicily. Under a full moon, he steered LCI L-124 straight at the beach, while Italian searchlights swept the water and coastal guns fired. His orders were to ground hard, drop the ramps, and get the hell out. He did it 3 times that night, unloading Seaforth Highlanders and Royal Marines while shells exploded around him. One burst killed 6 men on his port ramp. Alec kept the engines full astern, backed off, turned, and went in again. He spent the next year running the Mediterranean shuttle, Sicily, Salerno, Anzio, and finally the invasion of Elba in June 1944, Operation Brassard. Off Elba, he ferried Yugoslav partisans, Tito's men, onto beaches while German 88s tried to sink him. He learned to swear fluently in Serbo-Croat and kept a bottle of Slivovitz in the chart room. After VE Day, he volunteered for the Pacific, but the war ended before he could sail. He was demobilized in October 1945 as a temporary lieutenant commander RNVR with the 1939-1945 Star, Africa Star with North Africa 1942-43 clasp, Italy Star, Defense Medal, and War Medal. He never wore them. He went straight back to the stage, played Hamlet again, and then made Kind Hearts and Coronets, The Lavender Hill Mob, Bridge on the River Kwai, Oscar 1957, Lawrence of Arabia, and finally Obi-Wan Kenobi in Star Wars. He hated being recognized as that Jedi fellow, but he never minded being mistaken for an officer and a gentleman. He had actually been one, standing on the open bridge of a landing craft at 0300 hours while tracer rounds stitched the night and 200 terrified soldiers waited for him to get it right. He was knighted in 1959, married Marula Salaman for 62 years, had 1 son, and kept his naval cap in a cupboard until the day he died. On August 5, 2000, at age 66, he passed away from liver cancer. The Royal Navy sent a detachment to his funeral and lowered the white ensign to half-mast at Whale Island. Sir Alec Guinness, the most elegant actor of his generation, had once been a very young lieutenant who delivered armies onto hostile shores and never missed a tide.
James David Graham Niven was born on March 1, 1910, in London, the son of a landed family that lost everything in the Great War. His father was killed at Gallipoli when David was 5. Eton and Sandhurst followed, then a commission in the Highland Light Infantry. He resigned in 1933 after a prank went wrong. I locked a colonel in the lavatory. Sailed to America, sold whiskey in New York, raced horses in California, and by 1935 was a Hollywood leading man in Mutiny on the Bounty and The Charge of the Light Brigade. When war came in 1939, he was 29, rich, and famous. He was also the only British star to leave Hollywood and rejoin immediately. He sailed home on a cattle boat, rejoined the Army as a lieutenant in the Rifle Brigade, and within a year was seconded to the top-secret Phantom Reconnaissance Unit, GHQ Liaison Regiment, the outfit that spoke fluent French and German and moved behind enemy lines with radios. He trained with the commandos, learned to parachute, and became one of the few officers who could pass as a German civilian or officer. In 1942, he helped plan the Dieppe raid, then spent 2 years in the shadows of occupied Europe. He was at Normandy D+3 with Phantom, driving a jeep through the bocage, transmitting real-time intelligence while wearing a beret instead of a helmet because it made the French trust me. He fought from Caen to the Rhine,
interrogated prisoners in flawless German, and once talked his way out of a roadblock by convincing an SS patrol he was a staff officer from Berlin. By VE Day, he was a lieutenant colonel with the Legion of Honor, the Croix de Guerre with Palm, and the 1939 to 1945 Star, France and Germany Star, Defense Medal, and War Medal. He never applied for the campaign medals. He said, "I already have the memories." He returned to Hollywood in 1946, made A Matter of Life and Death, The Moon is Blue, Around the World in 80 Days, Oscar 1958, Separate Tables, The Guns of Navarone, and The Pink Panther. He wrote 2 best-selling memoirs, The Moon's a Balloon and Bring on the Empty Horses, that mentioned the war only in passing because, as he told friends, the real stories would get me arrested or killed. He married twice. His first wife died in a tragic accident, had 4 children, and kept a locked drawer full of phantom patches and a silenced Sten gun he never explained. He died of ALS on July 29, 1983, at age 73, still the perfect English gentleman who had once been the perfect English commando. David Niven was the charming rogue of 1,000 drawing-room comedies, but for 6 years he had been a real-life secret soldier who spoke better German than most Nazis, and who walked into hell wearing a smile and a beret. Every time he raised an eyebrow on screen, somewhere in the back of his mind, he was still talking his way past an SS checkpoint with a forged Ausweis and a heartbeat like a drum.
James Montgomery Doohan was born on March 3, 1920, in Vancouver, British Columbia, the youngest of 4 children of Irish immigrant parents who ran a pharmacy and a temperance hotel. Jimmy grew up with a perfect ear for accents. He could mimic anyone after hearing them once, and a love of radio drama. When Canada entered the war in 1939, he was 19, studying engineering at the University of British Columbia. He quit school the day after graduation in 1940 and joined the Royal Canadian Artillery as a gunner. By 1942, he had earned a commission and was a lieutenant commanding a battery of 105mm howitzers in the 14th Field Artillery Regiment, 3rd Canadian Infantry Division. On June 6, 1944, he was a 24-year-old captain aboard a landing craft heading for Juno Beach, Mike Sector, Courseulles-sur-Mer. His job was to bring 6 105mm guns ashore and set up firing positions before the first wave of infantry even reached the seawall. The ramp dropped at 07:30 a.m. Jimmy was first off, wading chest deep through water turned red, shouting for his men to follow. They dragged the guns by hand onto the sand while German machine guns swept the beach. He set up the battery under fire, registered the guns, and began shelling inland targets within 20 minutes of landing, one of the fastest artillery deployments of the day. That night, after the beachhead was secure, Jimmy was walking back to his command post when a nervous Canadian sentry mistook him for a German infiltrator and opened fire with a Bren gun. 6 rounds hit him, 4 in the leg, 1 in the chest, and 1 blew off the middle finger of his right hand. The chest round was stopped by a silver cigarette case his brother had given him. He carried it for the rest of his life. Medics patched him up on the beach, evacuated him to England, and told him he would never fight again. He learned to fly while convalescing, earned a private pilot's license, and flew liaison missions for the rest of the war. He finished as a captain with the 1939 to 1945 Star, France and Germany Star, Defense Medal, Canadian Volunteer Service Medal with Clasp, and War Medal 1939-1945. He kept the missing finger hidden on camera for the next 60 years. Scotty's right hand is almost never seen straight on in Star Trek. He came home in 1946, studied acting on the GI Bill in New York, and became one of the busiest voice actors in radio and early television. Gene Roddenberry cast him as Chief Engineer Montgomery Scotty Scott in 1966.
Jimmy gave Scotty his own accent and the immortal line, "I'm giving her all she's got, Captain," because, as he said, "I know what it's like when the engines are shot to hell and you still have to get home." He appeared in 73 of the 79 original Star Trek episodes, 7 movies, and countless conventions, always hiding the missing finger with clever hand positions. He flew his own plane until he was 80, had 7 children, and never missed a chance to talk to veterans. In 2004, at age 84, some of his ashes were launched into space aboard a SpaceX rocket, the first Star Trek actor to actually go where no man had gone before. He died on July 20th, 2005, at age 85. The Royal Canadian Artillery fired a 105mm salute at his funeral. James Doohan was the only man to...
Donald Pleasence was born on October 5, 1919, in Worksop, Nottinghamshire, the son of a railway station master who expected his boy to follow him into the service. Donald had other ideas. He wanted the stage. At 17, he was already acting with a repertory company in Jersey, playing old men because his bald head and piercing eyes made him look 40. When war came, he was 20, married, and a conscientious objector, until the Blitz changed his mind. In 1942, he volunteered for the Royal Air Force and trained as a wireless operator air gunner. He joined 166 Squadron at RAF Kermington, flying Lancasters out of Lincolnshire. His first op was Hamburg, July 1944. He flew 31 more, including the firestorm raids on Dresden and the daylight strikes on the Tirpitz. On the night of August 31, 1944, his Lancaster, call sign S Sugar, was hit by flak over Agenville, France, while returning from a raid on the V-2 sites. The starboard wing caught fire. The pilot gave the order to bail out. Donald clipped on his parachute, kicked open the escape hatch, and jumped into the black. He landed in a French wheat field, broke his ankle, and was captured within hours by a German patrol. He spent the next 11 months as prisoner number 782 in Stalag Luft I, Barth, on the Baltic coast, the same camp that would later inspire The Great Escape, though Donald was there after the famous tunnel breakout. He helped dig escape tunnels anyway, lost 40 pounds, and kept the other prisoners sane by staging plays in the barracks using Red Cross blankets for costumes. When the Russians were 30 miles away in April 1945, the Germans marched the POWs west. Donald escaped during the chaos, hid in a barn for 3 days, and was liberated by the British 6th Airborne on May 2, 1945. He came home with the 1939-1945 Star, Aircrew Europe Star with France and Germany clasp, Defense Medal and War Medal, plus a permanent limp and a stare that could freeze blood. He went straight back to the theater, then to films. The Cowardly Officer in The Great Escape 1963, The Forger Blythe in the same film, and eventually Ernst Stavro Blofeld in You Only Live Twice, the bald, scarred mastermind who stroked a white cat while plotting world domination. He played Blofeld because, as he told Sean Connery, "I've already met real ones. They wore gray uniforms and spoke perfect German." He made over 200 films, always the quiet, creepy Englishman with eyes that had seen too much. He never watched war movies about POW camps. He said the smell of boiled cabbage still made him gag. He was married 4 times, had 5 daughters, and kept his RAF logbook locked in a drawer. He died of heart failure on February 2, 1995, at age 75. The RAF sent a Lancaster flypast to his funeral. Donald Pleasence spent the war whispering Morse code at 20,000 feet and digging tunnels with a spoon. Every time he looked into the camera with those cold, unblinking eyes, he wasn't acting. He was remembering the real monsters who once kept him in a cage on the Baltic coast.
Richard Andrew Palathorpe Todd was born on June 11, 1919, in Dublin, the son of a British Army doctor and an Irish mother who died when he was 9. He grew up in India and England, trained at the Royal Military College, Sandhurst, and was commissioned into the King's Own Yorkshire Light Infantry in 1939. In 1941, he volunteered for the newly formed Parachute Regiment because it sounded more interesting than marching. By 1943, he was a captain in the 7th Light Infantry Parachute Battalion, part of the 6th Airborne Division. On the night of June 5-6, 1944, he jumped into Normandy with the first wave of Operation Tonga. Objective: capture and hold Pegasus Bridge over the Caen Canal, the eastern flank of the entire D-Day invasion. His stick landed at 0020 hours, only minutes after Major John Howard's famous glider assault. Richard's orders were to reinforce the bridge and then seize the nearby bridges over the River Deves. He fought hand-to-hand with German sentries, blew up one bridge himself with a gammon grenade, and held the line for 36 hours while wounded in the arm and leg. When the relief column from Sword Beach finally arrived on June 7, Richard greeted them with a cigarette and the words, "Sorry we're a bit late." He was awarded the Military Cross for exemplary gallantry and mentioned in dispatches. He fought on through the Ardennes and the Rhine crossing, finishing the war as a major with the 1939-1945 Star, France and Germany Star, Defense Medal, and War Medal. He never wore the ribbons. He simply went back to acting, co-founded the Shakespeare Memorial Theatre at Stratford-upon-Avon, and became a leading man in films like The Hasty Heart, The Dam Busters, and The Yangtze Incident. In 1962, when Daryl Zanuck needed someone to play Major John Howard in The Longest Day, Richard Todd was cast, portraying the very officer whose glider had landed 50 yards from where Richard himself had parachuted 18 years earlier. In one scene, he even wore his own original Dennison smock and red beret. When the director asked him to act like a real paratrooper, Richard smiled and said, "I'll try to remember." He was appointed OBE in 1993, married twice, had 5 children, and kept his parachute logbook on the mantelpiece next to his Oscar nomination certificate. He died peacefully on December 3, 2009, at age 90. The Parachute Regiment lowered the colors at his funeral, and a lone piper played The Black Bear over his grave. Richard Todd was the only man in history to parachute into Normandy on D-Day, and then return 20 years later to play himself on the same ground. Every time he stood ramrod straight on screen, it wasn't acting. It was muscle memory from the night he jumped into history with a Sten gun and a prayer and helped save the entire Allied invasion before breakfast.
Clarence Leroy Van Cleef Jr. was born on January 9, 1925, in Somerville, New Jersey, the son of a pharmacist who wanted him to follow into the business. Lee had other plans. He was tall, raw-boned, hawk-nosed, and already had the coldest stare in high school. When Pearl Harbor happened, he was 16 and working as a lifeguard. The day he turned 18 in 1943, he enlisted in the United States Navy and volunteered for submarine chaser duty because "I wanted to hump the hunters." After sonar school in Key West, he was assigned to USS C-694, a 110-foot wooden-hulled sub-chaser patrolling the Caribbean and later the Pacific. Lee's battle station was the sonar shack, headphones clamped to his ears, staring at a green scope while listening for the telltale ping of a Japanese or German submarine. They hunted U-boats in the Black Pit south of Cuba, then chased I-boats off the Marianas and the Philippines. He spent months at sea, sleeping 4 hours a night, eating cold beans, and tracking shadows that could kill 173 men in 30 seconds. In December 1944, C-694 rode out Typhoon Cobra,
the same storm that sank 3 destroyers and killed almost 800 sailors. 90-foot waves smashed the bridge, tore off depth charges, and nearly rolled the little ship over. Lee was lashed to his sonar set for 36 hours, keeping the scope alive so they could still fight if a submarine surfaced in the chaos. They survived, with a bent mast and a crew that never forgot the man with the ice-blue eyes who refused to leave his post. He finished the war as Sonarman First Class with the American Campaign Medal, Asiatic Pacific Campaign Medal with 3 battle stars, Philippine Liberation Ribbon, and the Navy Good Conduct Medal. He came home in 1946 with salt-cracked skin, a permanent squint, and a voice like gravel soaked in bourbon. He drifted into summer stock theater in New Jersey, then Hollywood. His first big role was one of the killers in High Noon, 1952. He's the one who smiles right before the gunfight. Directors quickly learned that when Lee narrowed those eyes, the audience believed he could kill you just by looking. He played villains in The Beast from 20,000 Fathoms, The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance, and dozens of TV westerns. Then in 1965, Sergio Leone cast him as Colonel Mortimer in For a Few Dollars More and Angel Eyes in The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. Overnight, he became the most feared face in spaghetti westerns, the man whose stare could stop a heartbeat. He made over 100 films, always the same cold, quiet killer who never blinked first. He married 3 times, had 3 children, and kept his sonar headphones in a glass case next to his Golden Boot Award. He died of a heart attack on December 16, 1989, at age 64. The Navy sent a color guard to his funeral in Hollywood Hills. The headstone reads simply, Lee Van Cleef, S1, U.S. Navy, World War II. Lee Van Cleef spent the war listening for death in the deep, then spent 40 years making audiences feel it with a single look. Every time he narrowed those pale eyes on screen, he wasn't acting, he was back in the sonar shack, tracking the enemy through a storm, waiting for the ping that meant someone was about to die.